Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Saturday morning of the 25th anniversary of the H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival. I'm one of the co-directors, Gwen Callahan, and I am joined with a massively talented roster of panelists for the evolution of cosmic horror. I'm going to call on each of you and just have you introduce yourselves and say a little bit about yourself. I'm going to start with Victor LaValle.
Hello, my name is Victor LaValle, and I've written a number of books, but the one for this festival that seems most relevant is a novella called The Ballad of Black Tom.
Craig Laurance Gidney.
Hi, my name is Craig Laurance Gidney. I have a book out called A Spectral Hue out from Word Horde, which is published by Ross, who is one of the panelists. And I also have a story coming out from Tor that's sort of cosmic horror on the drag circuit called Spider Threads.
So, Cassandra Khaw.
Hi, I'm Cass. I work as a scriptwriter at Ubisoft Montreal. When I'm not working on video games, I write a lot of cosmic horror, including the weird noir cosmic horror series, Persons Non Grata.
Nice. Ross Lockhart.
Ross, I run Word Horde. I publish weird fiction, including Craig, and I'm a fan of these other folks here.
And we have Zen Rocklyn.
Hi, I'm Zenny Rocklyn. I do write cosmic horror. My most recent release was a short story on Tor.com called The Night Sun, and I have a couple upcoming projects that are within cosmic horror.
By the way, Zen, your name display is not showing.
Oh, yeah.
If we want to change that. Never mind, the man behind the curtain. So while you're doing that, I would just like to thank you for joining me for this discussion of the evolution of cosmic horror. And kind of the pretext is talking about how the stories of those who traditionally have not had the power are particularly well suited for pulling back the curtain on the cosmic underpinnings of the universe. And that's very flowery language for I think what means is that how are authors that are working in the cosmic horror genre now that are Black, Indigenous, and people of color really kind of pushing this genre forward into a new territory, and how changing that affects, does it affect what came before? Is it because of what came before? And where are we going with it, and where we would like to see it in 5 or 10 years? So that's going to be kind of what we're talking about. So, I mean, just the elephant in the room, Lovecraft was racist. We know this from his letters that have been widely disseminated and discussed and dissected. And it's not really a secret. And, we acknowledge it, that I think a lot of us are fans of Lovecraft's work, and maybe we're fans before knowing this. So I'm interested to know from each of you how you came to Lovecraft. Was it at an early age or later in life? And then did you know this about him, and how did knowing that then affect your relationship with the work? I'm going to start with Victor.
Well, I started reading Lovecraft probably when I was, I think maybe 10 or 11. And I think I was young enough that I did not, I was not conscious of what was, with some retrospect, like completely blatant. I just didn't understand it, or like my mind did this job of sort of editing things out in the same way they still do with family members who say and do terrible things, and I find ways to overlook it because I love them. And then when I came back again at 15 and read really the exact same stories, I really was, I wanted to smack him in the head. It was like just a couple years difference between those two sort of ways of thinking. And maybe other people were aware much sooner, but it took that sort of span of time for me. And then after that, even if I read him, I could not forget what I sort of now understood.
How about you, Craig?
I actually came to Lovecraft because my younger brother was into heavy metal, and for some reason, Lovecraft and heavy metal go together like peanut butter and chocolate. And he happened to have one of the books lying in his room. So I picked it up and I read The Outsider, which I thought was absolutely gorgeous. And I was like, oh, wow, this is beautiful. I think this was him at his height of his powers. The next story opened with, and I was talking to my cat, Inward Man, and I threw the book across the room. So it happened pretty quickly. It was like 1-2. Great writer, racist as hell, boom.
And did that, did that feeling change over time, or do you still kind of feel that way?
I feel kind of queasy reading his stuff because it's like going into a diseased mind. And there's a part of me that likes reading about diseased minds, to tell the truth. But, I can't stay there for a long time.
So you probably would not call yourself a big fan of his work then?
No.
So then I'm interested then in your fiction. You are drawing some of that cosmic horror, but I guess maybe you would not consider yourself a Lovecraftian cosmic horror.
Right.
writer.
That would be correct. I kind of use it to explore wonder, marginalization, that sort of things. Because I think Terry and I spoke about this yesterday on another panel, that a lot of the concerns of Lovecraft, that you're alone in the world by an evil, uncaring universe, we've got that covered. I'm Black and gay. I mean, hello. So that doesn't bother me. What does make me interested about cosmic horror is the way that it can be used to talk about transcendent experiences, how it can be used to talk about found family and those sorts of issues. And that's what I use it for.
Thank you. Very nice. How about you, Cassandra? What is your relationship with Lovecraft?
I've been trying desperately while the other two have been talking to remember the exact moment when I read his books. I think it was probably in my late teens, early 20s. And I remember being fascinated at the concepts that he introduced, the whole idea of cosmic horror, things far bigger than us, that we can kind of vaguely steer away from our loved ones, but only just so. And I remember just kind of bouncing off so much of it because I grew up in Malaysia, and there it's just everyone is multicultural. You kind of accept the idea of a multi-ethnic background. And Lovecraft's repulsion and revulsion of immigrant communities just caught me by surprise, because I was like, I don't get this. I cannot wrap my brain around the idea of somebody freaking out at the concept of another ethnicity. It's just kind of wild. And so I'm not really a fan of his work per se, but what happened was I bounced off so hard, I started wandering away to find the people adjacent to him, the people whose works are in conversation with his, who have explored the things that he introduced, but in ways that are more palatable, so to speak.
I gotcha. And yeah, I hear you. How about you, Zin?
I definitely, I was also trying to think of the first time I read his work, and I came to it much later. I realized that I read a couple stories in my late teens, and that's when I was still doing a lot of mental gymnastics to recast, because a lot of horror just did not feature us. And the bits that I did find, like Tenor of Dew and Brandon Massey, it was like great, but I exhausted them really quickly. So I was doing the mental gymnastics to recast the cast, and then I realized that to recast the cast as Black, and I realized that some of them were obviously coded, and I was like, wait a minute, oh wait, oh, we're fish people, oh okay, cool. Oh no, this is actually not cool at all. So I was, and I also realized that I was reading a lot of uh material that was based off of him. Like one of my favorite books is by Douglas Clegg, I think it's called Neverwhere. And it's from a paperback from hell. It's like from the 90s, early 2000s. Um, and it's just it intrigued me. And I think I am like Craig, where I'm actually really not a fan of Lovecraft. I think his ideas are fantastic, and I'm more of exploring cosmic horror as the experiences of being a Black queer woman, moving through a white world. So yeah.
Thank you. And Ross, I'm interested in your perspective as the token white guy on the panel. How your perception of it, when you discovered Lovecraft and then discovered that he was racist and then discovered that like, oh, I'm reading this thing that maybe wasn't meant or intended to be directed at other people other than myself. What was that like for you?
Well, I talk about coming to Lovecraft's work a bit in the intro I did to the Book of Cthulhu. I fell into this in part because of Dungeons and Dragons and Errol Otis's illustrations in the book Deities and Demigods, and became fascinated with Lovecraft through the gaming lens first, and then trying to find his work and having folks say to me, oh, you don't want to read this guy, but read this instead. And turning me on to a lot of the, as Cassandra said, the adjacent material. So hitting people like Ted Klein before I was hitting the original sources in Lovecraft was a bit of an experience of going into Lovecraft with my eyes already open and realizing that he was reacting to a lot of his fears of the other, of becoming the other, at an age where, regardless of who you are or what group you belong to, you kind of feel othered. So I think that there's a big part to why Lovecraft appeals to people as they're starting to hit their teens, because everybody feels like a weirdo then. But yeah, reconciling with him as this sort of uncomfortable uncle, where it's so much derives out of his work, and his imagination was fascinating, but those fears are just so on the surface, and you feel a need to engage with it at arm's length and say, I don't agree with this, but this is interesting in this work.
And also I would add to that, if I could just throw in, like, I do think one of the things that is kind of amazing about him is like compared to many, many other writers who I feel like when I read them, especially when I was younger, I would read them and I would say, I think this is messed up, but I'm not sure. I love that Lovecraft, it's just like, no, this is like all of his ugliest stuff is like, it's the subtext and the context. Mm-hmm. It's everything. And it's also the elder gods and it's like everything is just layers of his fear, xenophobia, prejudice, all of it. And I think in a weird way, part of his genius is that he was, or maybe it's that he was so insulated. He didn't understand like now we say they use the inside voice and the outside voice, or they said the quiet part loud. He said the quiet part all in every page. And I actually kind of appreciate that, because unless you're like a complete apologist, there's no way to pretend this isn't what you have to talk about if you talk about him. And I find that great.
I would go on to say that, going back to the earlier thing, is that it is interesting to me. The morbid part of me is interested in discovering a diseased mind. And I kind of think it's interesting in the same way that a lot of outsider artists sort of take bits and pieces of their psychoses and put it front and center on the canvas or the work that they're working on. And he kind of did that with racism.
Absolutely.
He just, and eugenics, he just put it right there.
Yeah, there was like I had a discussion with a friend where we were both wondering if certain white authors use racist characters continuously or write their books in a certain time period just so that they can get away with dropping N-bombs. And and that's one thing about Lovecraft is he's unapologetic. His I love the apologetic conversations about his cat. It was like, well, he loved his cat, and I'm like, we're not cats.
Yes.
So yeah.
And he still, in that story, he still kicks the cat like 12 times.
Right.
That's a weird kind of love. Or specific kind of love.
It was kicking him scratching him because it didn't like its name.
That's right.
I think that brings up an important point, though, about being kind of in a bubble. We talk about people being in their own, spheres or in a bubble where everyone around you creates an echo chamber because they think the same way that you do. They consume the same media as you do. They watch the same news sources as you do. And it's hard to adjust your point of view once you get outside of that. And I'm interested in how that applies to the writing of cosmic horror too, and how do we break out of that bubble then? If you think about Lovecraft as being in his own white Anglo-Saxon Protestant bubble of this is how things are, and would probably be shocked to learn that that was offensive to somebody else. How do we break that out, and what do you feel is the next level of breaking outside that?
I'm going to jump in there. I think you just have to. I mean, in a weird way, Lovecraft had an odd excuse in that globalization, being able to interact with people across the world, it was not really a possibility. Then you had letters, you had people showing up in ships, sure, but he didn't have the technology that we do now. We can talk to everyone via social media with access to the people we admire, to people we respect. We have access to millions of academic journals and writing. And it's just simply, you do it. You do the work, you do the research, you pay attention to what is happening. I think staying in the bubble these days is the conscious effort. You have to work to be insular in this time of globalization.
I agree. Does anyone else have thoughts?
Well, I was thinking about this question. Sometimes I think about, I think one of the older members of the panel here. So I'm remembering my youth in the 80s, right, 70s and 80s, but just sometimes I think back fondly to just the radio, and that I could turn on the radio, that in theory, I might hear 4 or 5 different kinds of music programmed on the same station, in theory, right? Whatever that might mean. And as a result, I might discover that I like this, or I like that, or I like that. And that on their end, they're just filling time. And the ability to sort of, the modern sort of way that you can have, on Twitter or wherever, the algorithm can guarantee that you don't have to get bothered by anyone outside your bubble. And in fact, the algorithm is designed to silo you, right? On Facebook, on Twitter, on all of them. And it strikes me as such a sad part of and that is a purposeful choice, right? It's a commercial choice. It's a money-making choice to not cause discomfort or surprise in an effort to maximize profits. And feeling in a way, I feel spoiled that when I still do sometimes think about that old radio when I'm on whatever it might be on Netflix or Hulu, and it says you may like this or this, and then I'll say like, I can't just make my choices from what they think I will like. I have to go looking elsewhere. And of course, setting aside the reality that I'm still feeding into a giant corporate megalopolis, right? So acknowledging that part of it is still there, but I might still in some way go counter to that. But to Cassandra's point, I do agree. It's a choice I have to make, because there are these things that are set up to sort of say like, if you want to stay comfortable, we'll make it so that you never have to think about anyone else. But on the other side of that, there is also all this technology that says, if you want to read stories by Lebanese cosmic horror writers, I bet you there's an online magazine for that. You just got to go type it in, but it does take that effort.
So you have to become a searcher after horror. I was just saying, you have to become a searcher after horror.
Yes.
And I think now with the same globalization and the same technology, H.P. Lovecraft was writing into a void that didn't necessarily have the power to respond. Mm-hmm. And now we respond. We will drag you. You will be dragged. There will be consequences. And, unfortunately, sometimes that controversy drives certain crowds to participate in that particular problematic thing more often. But there is still going to be that kind of stain there, that letter of shame that exists. Like, even though American Dirt is doing well, or was doing well, it's still looked at in general with reviews and with online resources. It's viewed as extremely problematic. So while you can make some money, but your soul there will be some compromisation. There will be some compromising. So. Mm-hmm.
But if it's enough money, no, I'm just kidding.
That's true. Honestly, if it's enough money.
Only joking.
Probably. Do you feel like, and this question is for, maybe I'll ask Craig. Do you feel like there's a polarization that happens between, like the old school thinking about cosmic horror, and then the, for lack of a better word, the new school of cosmic horror, in the similar way that there's people who look for news outside their bubble and people who cling to it inside their bubble? Is like, or do you feel like cosmic horror transcends all of that?
Well, there's definitely, I have had unfortunate online dealings with people who are hell-bent on apologizing for Lovecraft, to the point that they completely make things up, saying, oh, well, he was married to a Jewish woman. Yeah, and look how that turned out, and they're like, well, towards his end, he changed. And it's just like, but there's no proof of that he did. And on top of that, one of my sort of pet peeves of the current administration is that it's bought sort of white supremacy back in vogue, and now it's alt-right, and you're kind of viewed as, well, not punk, but it's kind of like, yeah, we're cool, we're just pro-white. And you discover that a lot of these people love Lovecraft because of that. And there's an entire magazine that wanted to, as soon as the World Fantasy Award changed from his head to a magic tree, there are all these people that wanted to bring it back for a white supremacist award. So I definitely see it happening that way in terms of.
I have to admit, I would kind of love it if it did come back for a white supremacist award, because I would kind of be like, well, okay, so we all agree then.
Right.
This is it? Okay.
Right. You're proving our point.
Exactly. Like, sounds good. Yes.
So before we had started this panel, we had kind of batted around some ideas, and Cassandra said something that I found is really interesting. She said there's something about reclaiming spaces where you've been named monstrous. And in particular, the Medusa statue by Luciano Garbati, where she's holding Theseus's chopped off head. And you said for you, it's a little like that for you in Cosmic Horror. And I'm interested to know if you could talk a little bit more about that. And then for each of you, like what you find about Cosmic Horror that gives you inspiration to use it in your own work.
I think when I said that, that sense of being monstrous, that sense of being other, being different, being something that's unwanted by the status quo, it also comes with the implicit feeling that you're not supposed to be in there. Someone said no, someone said you're terrible. Why would you go there? And stepping into that space means saying, you need to confront this, you need to speak with us, you need to reconsider who you are addressing, who you are looking at. Because if you don't make that step and you let people stay within their bubble, they're going to keep bantering that thing over and over again until it becomes true to them, even though it's not true to the rest of the world. And there's also something about the immensity of cosmic horror that jives with how the world can feel when you're marginalized. The bigotry, the oppression, the thousand little ways the world wants to shave off your humanity. I mean, the horror is constant. And writing cosmic horror in kind of a weird way makes it feel like I can change that. Like you're pushing back against decades of horrible racist ideas. You're saying, I'm not going anywhere, even if the darkness is going to consume me. At least right now, I'm going to hold up a little light and scream until it eats me up.
Nice. I do get the sense sometimes with in some of the works that I've read from non-white authors in cosmic horror, that there is kind of a sense that you may be afraid of me, but I am not the thing that you should be afraid of. There's this larger thing out there that is much, much worse than me being a different color than you.
Well, and also, I should be more afraid of you. If we're upset, like, I was reading a thing, speaking of this idea of like, what is cosmic horror from like a different perspective. I was reading a thing in the paper, it was just like 2-3 days ago, in Canada, an Indigenous woman in Canada who was taken into the hospital with some kind of complications, some issues, and she was dying. All right, she's like the mother of a few kids, and she's dying there. And she, for whatever reason, she decides, or she knows, to stream her hospital stay through Facebook Live, right? And what she records in her last moments is all of the staff calling her nothing but denigrating names and saying, all you are, listen to her, she's just a hysterical Indian. These people don't know how to do anything. And this is the woman's dying moments. And this is the staff, they're speaking in French about her, right? And I felt like, in a way, like this is to me like some of what, at least for myself, when I think of like what I want to channel into like writing about horror and cosmic horror, is that sense like those same people undoubtedly go back home and their neighbors know them as friendly neighbors, kind people. At school, they volunteer. And then this other face is also their face. It's not it's not some other being beamed in. Like, I think like the greatest thing that cosmic horror, for me at least, can do is it sort of says, as bad as you think, or as hard as you think life is, it's worse. Mm-hmm. It's just worse. And that for some people in the world, it's much, much worse. And I'm going to tell it to you, you know, and feeling like that's what some new perspective can bring. And like, just when I read that story, I just was like, that's absolute existential horror, what that woman is living in those last moments. And that if she hadn't had the video, it would just be like, this is what this is what these people decided, the end of her life, this is what we're going to give her. Mm-hmm. It's just venom, and really maybe on almost cosmic level indifference / actual malignant hate. and it's
And
common.
and like in that moment, it's definitely cosmic, because it's like these people supposedly have the medical power to assist in some kind of way, and they are actively deciding against that. And not only that, but spitting this vitriol, like, I this is going on 20 years ago now, but I had a miscarriage, and not 20 years ago, I was still working. And I had a miscarriage, and I remember going through the steps. I remember consciously deciding, because of how I'd been treated through the medical profession, that I had to make sure that I was going through the correct steps. And I remember going to my boss and saying, I'm not feeling well. I need to go to the nurse, because I worked at health insurance at the time. And my boss kind of just shrugged me off, because it was like, oh, she's just complaining. She just wants to get out of work. And I had to say the words, I'm currently miscarrying, to get her to actually do something. And then when I got to the hospital, it was a whole nother set of things. And I remember distinctly sitting in one of the bays, waiting for some kind of medical decision to be made. And I remember the nurse saying, oh, well, she's not pregnant anymore, so there's nothing to worry about. And it's just like,
Jesus.
Oh my God.
I'm sitting right here. You're loud.
Horrible.
But like, and that's really a good point, Victor, in the sense of especially coming to any type of time that there is a person who perceives power over a marginalized folk, they will invoke every bit of that power to make that moment miserable for that person. I'm thinking about the kid who was he worked at a motel, and the woman started yelling at him because of the reservation issues, and he just said, it's above me now. And that was his response, his calm, cool, collected response. And she was going through the gamut of like, you're dropping N-bombs, to you are useless, to you are waste, you're to, oh no, I'm so sorry, to those white tears. And it's like seeing that consistently day through day, through any interaction that you are in, is like, this is the time. My fiction is now the time to show you that you are the fucking monster. You are the monster. We don't have to worry about Cthulhu. If it's Cthulhu showing up, it's like, oh, thank God. Where you been, man? Where you been? We've been waiting. We had these white people just on us. Come on, man. So, and that's,
This reminds.
Oh, sorry, Craig, go ahead.
Well, this reminds me of I watched the first episode of Lovecraft Country, which is out, and one of the things that really struck me in that first episode, I haven't seen any others, was the fact that, and it's something that my mother told me because she grew up in Jim Crow South, is that the rules of Jim Crow were not as set as you would think they are, meaning that she remembered that she walked all the way to the library because she was a reader, and she was told, oh no, you have to go to the colored library. And it's just like, these things could be pulled back and forth at any time. And at the first episode of Lovecraft Country, which isn't really a spoiler, this guy coming back from the war gets on a bus, the bus breaks down, and he has to walk all the way to town. And while the white people got in the back of another truck and got driven. And it's just like these laws and these rules just are totally arbitrary. So, and it's the way I feel also about, the BLM issues, which is that what people don't understand is that the police officers can do anything. It's not like if you follow the rule, then you won't get shot. You can follow the rule and still get shot. It does not matter, and people just don't get that it is a cosmic horror for us, that all interactions could go south for any reason.
I was actually going to raise a very similar point, especially given the discussion about Canadian healthcare. Canada has a lot of issues with racism, how it deals with its Indigenous population. And what I'm realizing from living here for a while is I'm terrified of the silences between the rules. Everyone says there's set rules of people pursuing things, but there's a lot of space in between where things can go horrifically wrong. I remember last year while I was adjusting to being, permanently located because I was a nomad for so many years, I needed antidepressants, and I called up telemedicine service and I got patched through to a doctor. And I remember the doctor telling me very distinctively, if you're not at risk of killing yourself, I don't want to waste anyone's time. We're not going to give you antidepressants unless, you're, what was it? At risk of being a burden to the Canadian welfare system.
Jesus Christ.
Wow.
And
Wow.
to the point everyone's making, cosmic horror is very often the systems that are currently in play for people who do not belong to the majority. It's right there. Cthulhu, it's going to be a nice break.
Yes. I mean, at least he would just kill all of us.
Yeah.
There would be no discretion.
Yes, the impartial death.
Exactly. And we were discussing this yesterday, that even while he's rising, people would be in doubt. White people would still be in doubt. No, our power still exists. No, he's literally, you see him, he might go back down. It's okay. No.
He's a straight talker. I like that.
He can make deals.
Oh my gosh. Ross, you've been quiet. I mean, for obvious reasons, but Cassandra, I'm glad you made the point about equating the cosmic horror with the system, because it does seem like that the system that's in place is the thing that's that makes things terrible. In a similar way that Americans, we see corporations as being more than people, more important. The benefit of the health of the corporation is more important than the health of the employees that work for the corporation. So that's a really nice point there. And I was thinking about how we, in the evolution of cosmic horror fiction, where it came from and where it's going. How would you, if you had to describe to someone who hadn't read any cosmic horror fiction, how you would describe the difference between Lovecraft and his contemporaries and your writing and your contemporaries now?
My contemporaries are a lot more interesting. Sorry, it's true. Angrier in many ways, less afraid. I think that's the thing I've noticed from a lot of contemporary cosmic horror. It's not a way of quantifying the unknown and just curling into yourself and saying that you are helpless. So much of modern cosmic horror feels like a snarl. It feels like a shout. It's acknowledging the systems that are trying to hold us in place, the systems, in some cases, they're trying to kill us. But it's very much a pushback. Whereas I think Lovecraft and his contemporaries, in a weird way, I don't blame them, because in a very large sense, they are products of their own societies. It's just them circling endlessly around the idea that they are terrified and trying to give power to themselves by, being horrible people in their work.
Do you feel like that is, historical events around the time we had gone through World War I, and then, in European wars and things like that, but World War I was kind of a shock to the whole global system in terms of the idea that something of that magnitude could occur. And then now seeing how, our current state of affairs in the world. Do you see that changing as we go along and as things develop? Hopefully better, but probably for the worse.
I think one of the other panelists might be slightly better at answering this because I was definitely raised in Southeast Asia, and the things that we were concerned about, like World War I, World War II, those are definitely things, and it touched us differently, so I don't feel quite informed enough to discuss that.
Sure. This might be a good one for Ross because you are also an author, but you're a publisher. Do you have observations on the evolution? What have you seen changing between when you first started publishing things and now?
Well, I want to look back a little further than that. Lovecraft and his contemporaries were writing in kind of decadent fantasy by way of existentialism, and that was what was new circa 1930. They were reacting to a lot of the same things the surrealists were reacting to, the realists like Hemingway were reacting to. So it was a different feel than now. What we're reacting to now is not just their fiction, but the world as we see it around us and how things have changed both for the better and for the worse. And I think we're winning. I think the fact that Silvia Moreno Garcia's Mexican Gothic is a New York Times bestseller says that the contemporary weird is here and here to stay. And it's wonderful. If you haven't read it yet, read it. But so many wonderful, diverse voices right now building off of the strangeness of the Weird Tales era and the science fiction that came after it and the fantasy boom and everything else gives us a literature and everything that builds off of that literature, film, television, and so forth, that is wondrous and strange and taps into the numinous and the weird in a way that I think these earlier modes didn't quite get. And we've got a great field ahead of us we can evolve into, and I think it's going to continue to evolve, despite the regressive types out there that are trying to hold it back and be very dogmatic about Lovecraftiana. It's only going to get weirder from here.
Hopefully. And that's a good question for each of you to answer. Like, where would you like to see what would you imagine, like, if you're looking forward 5 or 10 years into the future, like the landscape of cosmic horror, what would you like that to look like? Go ahead, Craig.
One of the things that I really like in general is that there's more than just, it used to be when I was coming up, there could only be one Black author, there can only be one gay author, and there can only be one woman author. And now there's a whole bunch of us. Now there's, Marlon James and me and Kai Ashante Wilson, and it's okay to have different voices. So what I would like to see is that I'd like to see, I don't know, Lovecraft erotica come out, or things that sort of describe even more marginalized communities, because how they interface with cosmic horror and dread is going to be completely different than how, sort of the main white male person is going to interact with it.
Oh, you, Victor?
Yeah, I mean, I think I totally agree with that. And I think like another way that if like a World War I helped create the changes that Ross was talking about within cosmic fiction, and if you include in like it also spawned modernism, it also spawned Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings, despite his claim it didn't. All of those things sort of coming from that, I feel like, to my mind, one of the things I'm most interested in is that we certainly are facing multiple, but in particular, like environmental, existential threats to everybody, right? And yet also not experienced the same by everybody. And so thinking about the ways that is another sort of, that is another cosmic force that feels, I mean, maybe since the industrial age, it hasn't seemed so clear that we can destroy the planet if we want to, and if we choose to keep going. And just wondering how that too sort of filters in, like in a Jeff Vandermeer kind of sense, you know, as one avenue of that, like Caitlin Kiernan does that in her work, but just that sense that becomes another sort of arena that cosmic horror just sort of pulls into itself more and more, almost like those old cosmic horror folks that I love, Blackwood or Machen or whatever, being sort of in awe or sort of on the edge of afraid of the natural world. And then thinking like, well, that was in some ways a much more, well, I don't know for sure, but now it feels like a much more sort of at-risk natural world than even then. And so what does that do to not just the people moving through stories, but the literal world that people move through, you know? And I feel like that tension, I imagine, will start to make itself known in ways that over the next few years, I would be excited for them to start appearing in the work, but then for us to not understand how much they were appearing in the work for another 5 or 10 years after that, right? Because these things bubble up long before we realize they're bubbling up, since they're coming from the subconscious.
How about you, Zin?
I definitely I agree with Craig in the sense that there's definitely a call for more, and it's not we're not tokenisms, we're not tokens anymore, or we're working towards not being tokens anymore. And I definitely, even, and this goes out to the writers out there of color and of various marginalizations, like, I promise it's not Highlander. It feels like it. It feels like it may feel like it. There may be some publications that make you feel like it, but go to another one. I think it's definitely a turn of the tide. I agree with Victor that it definitely is going to include elements that that we hadn't thought about before. And even as marginalized writers, there are going to be elements that we had not touched on before. While we get out our angst and while we get out our anger, and we express the insidiousness of white supremacy and the pervasiveness of white supremacy, there is going to be a change as far as talking about the environmental changes that are happening as well.
Could I piggyback off that? One of the things that Zin just said that I also want to offer, like the other side, that I because I'm in total agreement about, like, in many ways the exciting and open range for all these writers from marginalized groups, whatever that may mean for each of you, right? The writers out there. And I want to add to that, I feel like, you know, the writers who, generally speaking, it's not entirely, but generally speaking, who are trying to push the clock backward, right? And kind of still write the same old things. So, like, I guess I'm speaking particularly of, like, say, white writers of a certain stripe, right? Feeling like there is actually room for you in this future too. Like, you don't have to feel left out. But the thing is, you got to write about the new stuff. And the hard part about the new stuff is that it might implicate you and your characters in ways that, if you keep writing the old stuff, you don't have to deal with. You know, Lovecraft's characters and characters like them can always be the victim of the universe. But I think it would be amazing and bold, and I would want to read stories where your characters are the cause of harm, are the ones who do the thing, and you're writing about the experience of moving through maybe realization. I am playing a part in this. I am not innocent in this. The universe is corrupt and I have helped corrupt it. That is amazing place for fiction. And I promise you, I want to read those stories too. And I feel like in all of our talk, as we're talking about moving forward, I hate the idea that there's the easy out for a certain kind of writers to just sort of say, well, I watched that whole panel and they just said like, there's no room for me. And I feel like we're saying there is room for you, but you got to do a hard thing. Just like we are doing hard things by saying, this is our experience. This is our rage and our pain and our sadness and all that. You got to say, here's something new. And it hurts me to say it. It makes me look bad to say it. Say it. Like, it's scary, but what else are you gonna do, you know? Do that old thing, it's been done.
Definitely.
Sort of jumping in a little bit on everyone's points. I agreed with everyone. And like on the subject of new, I think I would like to see more new gods, more stories that become part of the canon that people draw upon. Like I like Nyarlathotep, I like Shub-Niggurath, Hastur, but even the Lovecraftian mythos as it existed before was the result of many, many people working within that universe. And I want to see what this means in the 5-10 years. What are the new gods that rise? Why do we keep with the same pantheon of chaos gods? Like there's room to grow. There are stories to borrow from, stories that are written now to have conversations with. And I'm curious and hopeful to see what comes out of that. And like to your point, Victor, about white authors writing about the things that you described, I want to see that. I want to see those books and those stories and conversations with the angrier things or the sadder things or the painful things that are being like written by people of color and what comes out of it. I'm sure some of it is going to be conflict. I'm sure people are going to butt heads in that dialogue, but that's not a bad thing. That is just the growth of the genre.
That's right.
And this is also not a free pass. Just to drop N-bombs. Just saying, write something new.
But to be confronting it, yes, not just like regurgitating it.
Right.
Absolutely. That is a very good asterisk.
New is very necessary.
Yes.
Less racism, please.
For you, Ross, as a publisher, when you're putting together anthologies and things like that, what is the trend that you're seeing with the range of cosmic horror that you're getting from white and non-white authors, and what is it that you're looking for? Is there anything specific that you gravitate towards wanting to give a platform to?
Well, with the caveat that this has been a really strange year. I tend to look for voices that are doing something unusual with the old toolbox and bringing new things to light. This year, I published a novel and a collection. Scott Jones's Stonefish, which is cosmic horror by way of AI, by way of the Anthropocene era coming to an end. And it's filled with natural beauty and strangeness and Bigfoots, and also has a broken, compulsive, masturbating AI that the protagonist has to deal with at various points. So it's the absurdity against the inevitability that really appealed to me about that book. I also published a John Langan collection that's doing gangbusters right now, which is Children of the Fang and other stories. And I think John is one of those people that understands both the history of the genre and the future of the genre in a way that few authors do. And he is able to embody a lot of different voices and types of characters, and shows a lot of diversity and strength within his own writing. But with anthologies, I'm kind of looking at a couple of things out a bit, and I would love to see, just more queries from writers of color. I would love to see more, because it's a lot of the usual folks that are sending me emails and going, hey, I got this idea. I'd like to see more emails from people I don't know. Introduce yourself. Even if I don't end up working with these folks, I'm aware of them and I'm able to use my platform to help promote them when they do get stuff out there. So just throwing that out there.
And while you're on that topic, how do people find you or how do people email you?
Wordhoard.com. There's an email link. I'm just Ross at wordhoard.com, or you can find me on Facebook and Twitter and other places like that. And, when we're in a world that there are conventions, I go to those too. And I'm very approachable. Excellent.
We are rapidly running out of time. We have one question in the Discord channel. And this is an interesting one. It may require more discussion time than we have time for, but I want to put it out there so that we can all be thinking about it, and then also to see if you have an answer. Hisham asks, how do you respond when you see more recent attempts at including BIPOC characters in stories, but the execution is off? That's a thinker. That's like really, wow, you guys, Hisham, you put all of our panelists on the spot, and I think I'm going to let you off the hook for that one unless somebody has a quick answer.
I have one. It's that on one hand, I like the fact that someone attempted it. You know what I mean? There's part of me that likes reading the old Andre Norton books where she kind of gets things wrong, but she had it in there. But the flip side is that you have to make sure that it's not a harmful representation, and that, I have worked in an editorial position, and I have occasionally had to tell people who are well-meaning, who are just like, this is a little magical Negro-ish, could you make her less folksy, and that sort of thing. So it's important that you do the work, but also you should read within books by people within that particular genre, within that particular demographic, in order to really understand the voice and the concerns.
I also highly recommend paying sensitivity readers. I know we don't have much time, but I used to feel okay with it until I just got angry with it. Like, keep it lily white if you have no idea what you're doing. Because I would rather read a lily white book than something that throws in a little flavor and there's no way in hell that this Black person would act this particular way. It's just like, as much as we are not a monolith and we are not the same and things of that sort, there are things that are ingrained in us from childhood because of the fact that we are Black in America, that we will react to certain things in a roundabout the same way. And it's, like I said before, like I used to do a lot of mental gymnastics to recast books, to say, this is a Black character, this is a Black character, and I'd ignore all of the descriptor tags. But then the behaviors were too out of it for me to even try to really do that. But I would say for any attempts happening now, pay sensitivity readers, pay them, and pay them not just to hear an echo chamber of you did this right, pay them so that you know that you are getting a response that is very truthful while not, completely tearing you apart.
There are also smaller companies, at least in the video games industry these days, that are kind of like souped up sensitivity reader pods almost. And like, if you have the money for your project, sensitivity readers, other people who can fact check the things that you are doing, there are a lot of resources. And I don't know how I respond to seeing the attempts. I guess it really depends on the delivery. If it does not feel like it's coming from a place of intentional harm, I think I'm a lot more, well, at least they tried. And then when it's the other bit, it's like, oh God, why did you do that? Like, in this day and age.
And I would just add in, this is all great advice, like purely from like a writing standpoint, is I usually have to say to myself when I'm working on a book, like, why am I making this choice? Just that, right? Like, why did I put this character in? And in particular, if you're talking about someone outside your race, your gender, your sexuality, whatever it might be, just to ask, why are they here? And if the answer is to give wisdom, to teach a lesson, to, and those are like, that is oftentimes the reason, right? Like, oh, they're going to be the one who tells this. And then you realize, like, as a writer, that's not a reason for a character to exist. They might have wisdom, but they should also be like a really good plumber.
Right.
They came into the story because there's a plumbing problem, and they shared their grandparents' wisdom. And then the character pays them for their job. So at least the reader sees paid, and then they can leave. That's still better.
Alive, leave alive.
And leave alive, yes. Yes.
Well, fantastic. I think I'm going to leave it there. My takeaway from this, though, and you guys can also tell me what your takeaway from this is going to be, is that I think that, like, in order to change the face of cosmic horror, we've got to get more faces in there.
Mm-hmm.
And just kind of like a wedge, you got to crack it in there and then pry it open. So I would just like to say thank you to all the people who were the one Black writer and the one woman writer and the one gay writer in the genre for kind of like, picking that door open to let all the rest of us in.
And now we do the same.
Mm-hmm.
So there's even more.
Yes.
And before we totally end, I would love for each of you to tell us where we can find your work, and if you have anything new coming out, what to look for. Go ahead, Victor.
I have nothing new. So you can find me on Twitter at Victor LaValle. And next year I'll have a novel coming out, but it's a long ways away.
And if somebody in the cosmic horror genre are interested in picking up a book, if they're a new reader, what book would you recommend?
So then I would say The Ballad of Black Tom is a novella. It won't cost you much, and I think it's a fast read.
Okay. And Craig, where can we find you, and where can we find your books?
Well, I tweet at Ethereal Lad, but you can find it also using my government name. And I have a website, CraigLauranceGidney.com. And my latest story, which is going to be an audio story coming out from Tor.com, touches on horror, cosmic horror, but in the sort of ballroom scene of the, yeah.
Okay. And if someone is new to your work and they're a cosmic horror fan, what would you recommend they start with?
I guess my book, A Spectral Hue, out from Ward Horde Press.
Okay. Thank you. And Cassandra, where can we find you and your work?
I am mostly on Twitter at twitter.com, Khaw.
And if you had to recommend a starting place with your work for a cosmic horror fan, what would you recommend?
I guess the default answer at this point is Hammers and Bone, but I think personally, I like people pick up Rupert Wong Cannibal Chef because it deals a lot more with Malaysian horror than Hammers and Bone does.
Fun. Hey. And Zin, where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter mostly at Intelligent Twat. I always get a giggle at that name. Intelligent Twat. As far as work that is inspired by or deals with cosmic horror, it's unfortunately a project that I can't quite talk about yet, but it's coming out next year. I probably said that too much, but
it's okay.
Yes.
I was going to jump in and save you there, but you're also one of the authors in our 2020 Challenge from Beyond story. So people can find a little bit of your writing there. And that was offered through our Kickstarter, but any books that were unclaimed in there will be on Arkham Bazaar later, along with the microfiction contest winners. So people can get a double dose of like micro micro horror and The Challenge from Beyond, which is for those who aren't familiar, it's a round robin story that we've been doing every year for the Kickstarter with different modern cosmic horror authors. And Ross, has been part of that. Where can people find your books, and what would you recommend that they start with?
Well, wordhorde.com, got all sorts of fun stuff. Right now we've got an anthology called Eternal Frankenstein up that's 30% off, so you can save some money and get a cool anthology when you're ordering Craig's book. We've also got an ebook bundle up at Story Bundle right now, and so you could get a great taste of all sorts of Word Horde goodness for $15, and part of it goes to Planned Parenthood. So I definitely recommend checking it out if you're an ebook reader.
Yeah, that story bundle, which was curated by Molly Tanzer, who was in yesterday's panel, and Herbert West as cultural icon, curated that for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
She's got like some really good picks in there. It's an
she's wonderful.
deal.
And I've got some more stuff from her coming out next year, so stay tuned.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank you all again for spending this hour with me. I am very educated and entertained and edified by it. And I hope that all of our people watching have learned something new and will go find something else to add to their book pile. So thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Glenn.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.